Okay, we are now live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 24th meeting of the Zoning and Land Use Committee. We are here to have a presentation by the Department of City Planning about their zoning text amendment on carbon neutrality. And I saw a preliminary report before the zoning text amendment was finalized. I think you'll find it very interesting. And just to say, this is a zoning text amendment of big changes, but they do not follow the same procedures as other zoning changes where there is. What do we go through? ULURP, thank you. We don't go through ULURP for a text amendment. So if Department of City Planning is ready, please begin.
Sure, I can kick it off. I'm going to share my screen. Just give me 1 second.
Amber and I are here as well. I know many of you. Hi. I think I'm going to let Lucia and Amber mostly handle the presentation, but if you have questions that you want to put in the chat that I'm able to answer in the chat, I'm happy to do so. So if you want to put some questions in the chat, we could do so, and then we'll have more of a Q&A, I think, afterwards as well.
Yes. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. So I know David kicked us off a little, but I'm
Yep.
just going to repeat some things. So I know everyone doesn't know who I am. So it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Lucia Capuccio. I'm in DCP's Brooklyn office, as I mentioned, and I'm actually the new liaison for CB10. So you'll see more of me taking over from David, who you know. He's now the team lead for Southern Brooklyn in our office. I'm also joined by Amber Nowak, who's in our climate and sustainability team. So she's also here for support. As I said, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity, to talk about this text amendment with you all. So tonight we're going to be going over the City of Yes for carbon neutrality. It's a proposal to update the zoning resolution to help meet New York City's climate goals. As David mentioned, as I'm presenting, I'm going to go through the presentation. It's about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we're going to have Q&A after. So we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, but feel free to put things in the chat if you have questions. And we also have an appendix with more detailed slides. So if there's a proposal that you want to, more details on, we will go through that later. But if it's okay with everybody, I'm just going to run through it and then we'll get to the questions after. Okay, so City of Yes for carbon neutrality is the first of 3 projects that the Department of City Planning is developing as part of the broader City of Yes initiative. So 2 other proposals are coming later this year and next year. They're going to be economic opportunity and housing opportunity. And the engagement for economic opportunity is actually going to start later this summer and fall. And then housing opportunity we're going to get into in probably the first to second quarter of next year. So these are 3 distinct and independent proposals, and they're being staggered so that there'll be plenty of time for public review. But tonight we're just going to be talking about carbon neutrality, and we'll be, as I said, there'll be plenty of time to talk about the other 2. Our department is still working on it, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts when we get to those amendments. So many of elements of the carbon neutrality, they're urgently needed. They're aimed at delivering zoning relief to home and building owners who are trying to undertake smart retrofit projects to cut energy costs, but that are currently prevented from doing so because of the zoning that we have. So first, I want to take a minute to kind of frame our conversation about why this text amendment is coming, through the city. Why are we even talking about carbon right now? It's important to emphasize that we're facing a climate emergency. It's largely fueled by global carbon dioxide emissions. So carbon dioxide makes up most of the United States greenhouse gas emissions. They were 80% in 2019. These emissions generally come from human activity, specifically the combustion of fossil fuels like diesel, gasoline, natural gas, and home heating oil. In 2016, 175 countries signed the Paris Agreement, which is a vision to curtail human greenhouse gas emissions in order to limit overall global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, and thus prevent further environmental damage associated with climate change. Here in New York City, we've been implementing this vision through a number of initiatives under the umbrella of achieving carbon neutrality by reducing the city's emissions 80% by 2050. And you may have seen this mentioned, it's by 80 by 50 for short. So what do we mean by a carbon neutral city? It's a city in which we're focused on reducing operational carbon emissions in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So it's a city where we've reduced our overall energy needs. And to do this, we'll need to retrofit almost every single building in the city to become highly efficient to reduce wasted energy. It's a city where we've cleaned the grid. And to do this, we'll need to switch from a fossil fuel powered electricity to renewables like solar and wind. And it's a city where we've electrified all remaining energy needs. That includes our vehicles and our buildings. This means moving away from fossil fuel fired furnaces and boilers to newly electrically powered technologies for heating and cooling, namely heat pumps. As you can see in the chart, the key driver of New York City's carbon emissions by far is our building sector. And there's a big relationship between our buildings and the zoning laws that govern them. So when it comes to our department's research, we're building on a strong foundation, namely Zone Green from 2012, and many reports that have been authored since then. In some ways, you can think of our research now as a follow-up to Zone Green. So it's a chance to revisit work that was done 10 years ago and adjust it in light of the technological and legal changes that have happened since that report. This update has been informed through the feedback from architects, engineers, and advocates about issues that have been identified and ideas for improvements. It also includes updates to zoning that reflect the Climate Mobilization Act at the city level, as well as the Climate Leadership and Protection Act that was passed at the state level. So development of this proposal in particular began in March when Mayor Adams announced his vision for a city of yes. Since then, we've conducted outreach with practitioners and other subject matter experts to help us ensure that proposal will be helpful to those who are trying to add solar, electrical vehicle chargers, or heat pumps to their homes and businesses. We've also held 4 open to the public info sessions on this research. We had 2 in October of last year and 2 in March of this year, in which our chair, Dan Garodnick, invited all the community boards. And I know from David that some of you attended some of these info sessions. So along the way, we've been asking experts, nonprofit leaders, and advocates, what needs to be done to achieve our collective climate goals, and how has zoning helped or hurt, achieving those goals. So with those in mind, and after meeting, after our department met with, a number of agencies and advocacy groups, they've developed these 4 key goals that we're working towards, as well as 17 specific zoning changes that we've identified to achieve those 4 goals. And I will now go into more specifics on that. So the first key goal is supporting the decarbonization of our city's energy grid. Illustrated on this side are initiatives already underway at the state or city level. These are not part of our zoning proposal, but they're in the context in which our planning work has been informed. By 2040, New York State is legally required to achieve 100% renewably based energy grid. To support this, we'll be developing large amounts of offshore wind and bringing in more clean hydroelectric power from upstate New York and Canada. So this includes putting, our rooftops to work generating energy across the city. To utilize the energy from offshore wind and from rooftop solar, our energy grid will have to become smarter and more decentralized, which means that the resources are spread throughout the city instead of limited to utility sites in outlying areas. To support this decentralized and smarter grid, we'll also need to rely on energy storage, which are essentially, large batteries where energy is regenerated. So to support the ongoing work of cleaning the grid, the New York City zoning can help in 5 key areas that you'll see here. So first, we can take a look at our rooftop zoning allowances to ensure that there aren't any limitations holding us back from solar goals. In many districts, for example, there are current limits on the amount of rooftop that can be covered by solar. My apologies, I'm reading off an iPad, so that's why I'm looking on this way. So in many districts, for example, there are current limits on the amount of rooftop that can be covered by solar panels. This proposal will update those rules to ensure that a roof can be completely covered by solar. Second, we need to take a similar approach for our city's 8,000 acres of open parking areas, ensuring that zoning is updated to always allow solar canopies over parking lots. Third, if you want to generate clean energy for utility for people elsewhere in your neighborhood through the community solar program, zoning considers that a commercial use. But we need to recognize there are large residential campuses, hospitals, schools, and colleges and residential districts where community solar would be a great fit. So we would need to update zoning to allow for this. Fourth, we would need to ensure that SAFE, FDNY, and Department of Building reviewed storage facilities are located where they're needed most. Energy storage is currently not allowed in residential districts where people need access to clean and renewable energy. Zoning needs to be updated to allow specific rules for energy storage and help facilitate a rollout across a broader range in the city. Finally, onshore wind faces strict limits in today's zoning without a so-called relief valve for sites where greater heights may be appropriate. The zoning proposal would create a new tool that can be used by future applicants to submit onshore wind facilities for a public review process with the City Planning Commission. Just to be clear, this proposal doesn't change the current height restrictions on wind turbines. It would just allow a process where people would go before the commission and state their case for an application. The second goal we're seeking to support relates to eliminating fossil fuels from our city's 1 million+ existing buildings, almost all of which will still be around in 2050 when we need to have achieved carbon neutrality. So these buildings, as I mentioned before, are by far our biggest source of carbon dioxide emissions. And to improve them, we'll need to retrofit virtually every single building so that it no longer depends on oil or gas-powered furnaces and boilers, and to replace them with new highly efficient electric systems, and to improve the efficiency of exterior walls, windows, and roofs to keep the heat and cooling inside. It's important to note here that 2 laws were adopted by the City Council in 2019 and 2021 that are informing our work here. For large buildings, which are defined as buildings 25,000 square feet or larger, Local Law 97 will begin to impose fines on those buildings if they do not cut their carbon emissions. So fines will begin next year and they'll increase through 2050. Second, there's Local Law 154, which requires that all newly constructed buildings are electrified from the get-go. So fossil fuel-based equipment will no longer be allowed in new construction. So within this context of these laws that were passed, zoning can help support the decarbonization of buildings in 3 key ways. So first, zoning can accommodate the increasing need for outdoor equipment, such as heat pumps, which cannot be located in building basements or cellars, to be located above the zoning height limit on building rooftops. So by getting zoning out of the way, we'll give homeowners, architects, and engineers greater flexibility to navigate the best path for electrification for their buildings. Second, zoning needs to ensure that where someone is trying to add thicker insulation, or even in some cases for larger buildings, recladding the building by removing an old facade and replacing it with a new efficient one, that they don't run into zoning obstacles that prevent them from undertaking the project. And thirdly, we need to update an existing incentive. In 2012 Zone Green report and zoning changes that I mentioned, there was a wall thickness reduction, which awards a small amount of additional floor area for better than code buildings. And we would like to see that updated to reflect the latest energy code and best practices for the future. And with regards to costs and implementing these retrofits, many funding sources at the federal, state, and city level are available. The New York City Accelerator is a program run out of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice that can help connect property owners with technical and financial support if they seek to do these retrofits. The third goal that zoning is seeking to support is decarbonizing private vehicles. So there are currently 2 million private vehicles registered in New York City, and less than 1% of those vehicles are zero emission. By 2035, New York State has indicated that all new vehicles sold in the state will need to be zero emission. This will obviously be a long-term transition, but we would like to help owners make that switch to electric, cars, and to make that switch. Federal and state initiatives are underway, but one key issue that zoning touches on is where you can park and charge your electric vehicle. So addressing this need will be key to helping New Yorkers make that switch. Finally, this proposal also aims to support alternative transportation modes such as bicycles, scooters, or mass transit. So within this context, zoning can help support this goal with 5 key changes. First, to allow commercial charging facilities in all commercial and manufacturing districts. They are currently prohibited in about half of the city's commercial districts. Second, to allow building owners to designate a portion of their existing parking spaces to be offered up as a public electric vehicle charger sharing spaces. The same rules that currently apply today for car sharing vehicles in existing parking garages or lots. Third, allow for more flexible use of public parking lots, public parking garages, and commercial accessory parking facilities by allowing car rental, car sharing, commercial vehicle storage, and public EV charging or electric vehicle charging within those facilities as well. Fourth, expand special rules that only apply in Manhattan currently that allow for indoor automated parking facilities to be available to everyone citywide. And fifth, to update our parking rules to acknowledge the need of public bicycle parking and allow bike parking facilities in commercial districts. Finally, our last goal relates to reducing our city's stormwater and solid waste and helping eliminate the carbon emissions associated with both of those waste streams. So first, we can reduce stormwater runoff by promoting greater permeability on site. This means less water flowing to energy intensive treatment plants. Second, we can reduce the energy associated with hauling and processing garbage by reducing the amount. Up to 45% of our waste stream is organic matter that doesn't need to go to landfill and can be reused within the city. And third, we can reduce the carbon emissions associated with our food by promoting more local food production on our city's rooftops. So within this context, zoning can help contribute to a better environment in 4 key ways. First, clarify zoning's paving rules to ensure that permeable paving, which allows water to infiltrate the soil right where it falls, is always allowed. Second, update our zoning's street tree requirements to allow for new high performance tree bed types, such as connected tree beds and rain gardens. Third, our zoning resolution doesn't even mention the words compost or recycling because it's from 1961. So it's time to add specific rules clarifying where where these uses are allowed to help those sectors grow. And finally, rooftop greenhouses are allowed on top of non-residential buildings. But to build one, current rules require you to obtain a certification from the chair of the City Planning Commission. By streamlining this requirement, we will allow the Department of Buildings to review applications for building permits and cut costs and simplify the process for those looking to grow food on their community's rooftops. So this concludes the overview of the 17 specific zoning changes we've identified to help support the larger project of decarbonizing our city. And I can come back to this slide as well. We just have two more. So as a citywide zoning text amendment, this process will continue for the next several months. All 59 community boards will be concurrently reviewing this proposal with their borough boards and the borough president. So that's where we are right now. Obviously, all the boards are reviewing this. In July, the City Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on the proposed changes. That date is not set yet, but it will be in July. And then in September, taking into account all that they've heard during the review process, the commission will vote on approving or modifying the proposal. And then it will pass to the City Council, where the council will have 50 days to ultimately adopt the zoning changes and make them law. So thank you so much. We're happy to answer questions. I will note before we get started that if there are questions we do not know the answer to, because obviously some of this is pretty technical, we will make sure to follow up with our zoning team. So we will get you written responses, if you have things that we can't answer in the moment, but we will do our best. And yeah, I'll kick it. Thank you so much for listening. And I can just take it back here for a second.
I want to thanks, Lucia, for that. And Amber, if you have anything to add, please feel free. But I want to take a second and just note one of the things that I was, so excited about being, CB10 liaison for a short but influential time was seeing especially the waste and water sections here. I know that that's, a top issue for the community board, and those, seemingly small changes in terms of porous paving, adding street trees, allowing rooftop greenhouses, green roofs, and things like that really can have a huge impact on the infrastructure system. And this is not in lieu of updating the infrastructure system. We understand that's something that's necessary, but those things do have a big impact. And all of these really all together impact the costs that come in for, if you're a homeowner. I know there's a lot of homeowners in CD10. And when it comes to things like insulating your home, when it comes to things like you having to use, and run the AC because there's drafts in the house or things like that. These are things that you may have the opportunity to do, and we want to make sure that zoning doesn't get in the way of doing so. And so this can cut a lot of costs. So I think there's some really exciting things here for CB10 personally, but I want to hear from all of you to hear what you think and hear what your questions may be.
Before I open it up to general comments, I would like to make a comment that you show solar parking canopies, you show rooftop solar on large facilities, you show battery storage, but you don't show them in residential communities, in low density residential communities, like much of Southwest Brooklyn. So I think we should see your image as to how that would work in areas like this. And then I think everyone would be interested in knowing the cost for a 1 or 2 family house to retrofit to complete electric reliability to no fossil fuel. Because as the liaison for Community Board 10 and Southwest Brooklyn, Community Board 10 pays among the highest real estate taxes in the city. Compared to other parts on the value of our homes. And now if you're adding incredible costs to retrofit these homes, how can we afford that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely hear that concern. And I think it's something around the city that will every board is going to have questions. I will say that there are a lot of funding sources available, and there will be more available coming with the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed last year. If we didn't drop these in the chat yet, I will ask my colleagues to. The New York City Accelerator is a city-run program that allows homeowners to call in and get, financial assistance and advice. So to your point of how much would this cost, I think that would be a great question to ask them. I don't have it offhand, but there are these funding sources coming through both the state, federal, state, and city that will be supporting homeowners who choose to retrofit. As David mentioned, these proposals.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt you. You say who
Okay.
choose to retrofit. You're telling us that we will be required to retrofit.
So local law.
It's not an option.
Local law 97 will be requiring it for buildings of square feet of 25,000 square feet or more. Homeowners do not necessarily need to retrofit. These proposals are not required. They're supposed to make it easier for homeowners to undergo those changes if they'd like. David, I don't know if you have more to add here, but everything that we're showing, these will not be, you do not need to put, solar panels on your home. None of these are requirements. The Department of City Planning, I should say, is making these proposals so we don't impede homeowners who want to do those, those projects. But the Department of City Planning itself will not be requiring anyone to do anything based on these proposals. It's just supposed to make it easier if you choose to go that route. David, I don't know.
This is a change from the proposal I heard several months ago.
I'll jump in briefly. I believe that that presentation was by myself. And so
Yes.
I apologize if it came across incorrectly. That it was never the case that any of these proposals required homeowners to either build solar canopies, to construct electric car charging stations. We recognize that there are owners who would like to do so. Now, I want to make sure that we don't conflate this with Local Law 97 or with any other state laws that may have requirements upon building owners, right? So this is a change to the zoning resolution. And what the intention here is to say is, well, there may be homeowners who want to take these actions, whether it's to, lower their costs by electrifying, by going solar, or just because they recognize, or just because they're environmentalists and want to do it for whatever reason. And in those cases, we don't want the zoning resolution to be a barrier to those folks doing so, because those folks doing so are going to help us reach our climate goals that Lucia mentioned. And so this change to the zoning resolution is not adding any additional requirements. Really what it's doing is removing impediments that may have existed or may currently exist to folks who do choose to go through it. And again, I don't want to conflate what's happening with the zoning resolution to any of the local laws or state laws that may require homeowners to do so. This is only one part of the larger puzzle, obviously. And so
Well, I think we could use clarification on that. And then the concept of rooftop gardens is excellent. However, there are structural problems. I recently heard someone say they were considering, as part of a school, to put a rooftop garden, but for the student use, but it was not structurally feasible. Will there, before people put in rooftop gardens, will there be information available to them to be sure that their home is structurally solid?
I mean, a lot of that does rely upon the property owner to do that research. But of course, every proposal that comes through that requires any sort of permit, whether it be something on the rooftop or elsewhere, will have to undergo review by the Department of Buildings and by our other agencies. And they would certainly not allow such structure to go where there's concerns about the underlying structure, right? So all of the proposals that are going in here don't necessarily allow folks to kind of just build whatever they want to build. You'll still need to submit your permits. You'll still need to get approval. But that approval will not be impeded by zoning resolution sections that we find, currently for our review to like impede those goals and to stand in the way. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything, but any proposal will still have to go through our review. But what we're trying to do is remove the impediments and the barriers that say you cannot do X, with X being installing a couple solar panels or adding adding a upgraded insulation or something like that. Currently, the case is there are a lot of barriers that make it very difficult for folks to do that, if not impossible. And so we want to remove the impossible for folks who want to do so. But that does not mean that folks can pick up hammers and nails and just build whatever they want, right? We still need to make sure everything is safe. And so that process will not change.
Thank you. Josephine, then Leodan.
Everything is
Thank
safe. And so that process will not change.
Okay, thank you, Doris. So I had a question you had mentioned in the presentation, and I'm sorry, I didn't really read through all of the text changes. But you said that energy storage now is currently zoned in manufacturing areas, and that's going to be changed. Can you tell me what zoning districts will energy storage be allowed in?
Yeah, let me, sorry, I don't know if, I think my screen's not being shared anymore. Is that
Yeah, I'm
right?
sorry. I do that when we're talking. You could put
Oh,
it.
okay, yeah,
My apologies.
I was just gonna pull that slide up if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Just 'cause I just want to, let me just. Okay, so I'm not, let's see if this answers your question. Okay. Yeah, so it's currently allowed in commercial and manufacturing districts. So that would be, I believe, all of them.
Includes, I mean, board 10 is predominantly C1, C2. And I mean, well, we do have, some C4, it's mostly lower C districts. So that's why I wanted to.
Right. So I think this. So right, yeah, so it looks like so they would be, in this proposal, they would be allowed as of right in commercial and manufacturing districts. But as you can see, if it was greater than 10,000 square feet in residential districts, it would still require a BSA review. And I do want to clarify, I know this has come up in other settings, and it might be a question that folks have. When we talk about energy storage systems, we're not talking about kind of like the lithium battery storage that you might, hear about, and, they can cause fires and they're unregulated and they're like in scooters, or, this is a FDNY and DOB would be inspecting and improving these. We've been working very closely with the Department of Buildings and the fire department throughout this process. So it's not to say that someone would just be able, to put an energy storage system, in their backyard. It would have to go through, like what David was speaking to, a permitting process, an inspection process, a safety process. So
you're saying a BSA review process, which essentially to me, having gone through many BSA hearings, is as of right, because BSA, I don't know one instance where BSA has denied an application. We just went through a whole ZQA for a parking lot in the district, and essentially the BSA commissioners treat the application as of right. So that does concern me, because I think that there should be. I'm doing a lot of reading on battery storage, and I think we do have to be concerned. I'll just disagree a little bit on that. Understanding that a lot of battery power would be required. Is there provisions also in this text about battery disposal? Because my understanding is that that's a big part of going electrification, is that batteries don't live forever, and that there's going to be a great deal of disposal issues. Is that addressed in this text amendment?
That's a great question. I'm going to ask my colleagues. I don't believe so, but I don't want to.
Well, I can say that the disposal will be subject to any hazard mitigation requirements. So whatever disposal requirements for hazardous waste, they would need to comply with those. So this would be no different from other hazardous waste disposal.
Right, but I'm just talking about the siting. Are there changes in siting provisions? I know the city of New York has very limited areas for hazardous disposal. I don't know if those were going to be expanded, considering that battery use is going to be significantly with the, and very ambitious goals that would require full electrification.
That's a good question. I think we can refer that to our colleagues at the office and find out about the expansion of the actual storage facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Leah Dan.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, David and Lucia, for the presentation. I think the commentary after the presentation really cleared up a lot of the questions that I had. I think it's clear to me that this is kind of cleaning up the zoning to be in line with the other climate goals that the city is being kind of pushing, just to make sure that the zoning, which is the first thing that in the case of development is usually studied or looked at, that we're kind of in alignment with allowing projects that want to pursue cleaner energy, that they're not kind of smacked by this process. Is DCP going to be providing development standard for this initiatives, especially pertaining with the aspects of like character and I'm just thinking to myself, like, is it going to be a free for all, or would there be limits or standards that need to be followed? In the case of solar panels, would you guys be thinking that we need to be holding off like certain perimeters from visibility or from the street? I mean, like, is that too early of a question at at this moment? Have you guys started thinking about this?
In terms of like urban designer aesthetics, we won't be having standards per se. I will say for like the solar on the roof, we will be allowing 100% coverage. So it might be something that you would see from the street, but it wouldn't be like hanging over. Obviously there will be an aesthetic trade-off in some cases if people choose to have solar panels on their roofs. But we won't be, DCP won't be having urban design guidelines, or as long as it fits into the zoning. We're mainly focused just on the zoning provisions itself to allow people, if they want to have 100% of their roof and solar, as long as that's cleared by the permitting, they would be allowed to do that.
I'll add briefly that we're not introducing standards necessarily in the zoning resolution for that. However, I want to reiterate kind of, or I guess similar to a previous point, that none of this allows any projects to move forward without following DOB or, landmark preservation or historic district guidelines. Those will still stand, and those will not be affected by any zoning resolution, alterations that may be made here. So DOB still has standards, to my understanding, of solar panels on rooftops. You can't build a solar panel that goes up an additional 90 feet or something. Not that anyone would do it, but in theory, right? And so those would still be in place, as would, again, any landmark, preservation guidelines or historic district guidelines or historic landmark guidelines, other DOB processes as well. Amber, feel free to update or comment anything I said.
Yeah, that's true. And we've worked closely with our other partnering agencies to, explore these different questions around visibility, around efficiency. And so they are, our partners in this, and they are in support of this initiative.
Thank you.
Yeah, and David, I think
And-
you're, sorry, I just wanted to add, David, I think you're right. You're correct. There will be a height restriction on the solar panels. I believe it's 15 feet, but I can confirm that via writing. So yeah, it won't be as if you could have, a giant, 40-foot, thing on top of a building. It would be restricted to 15 feet.
And you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, would there be height restrictions for the enclosed roof agricultural buildings? And also, is that also a full footprint option?
That's a good question. I can certainly get back to you
Thank you.
on that. Yeah.
And do you mind clarifying the second question so we make sure we can answer correctly when you say
Yeah,
footprint option?
yeah, you showed greenhouse options on the roof for growing agricultural foodstuffs and other things. So my question is, are you going to allow a full roof footprint coverage
Mm.
for these buildings? And where are the height restrictions going to be for those structures?
Sure, we can get back to you about that.
What other rooftop construction are we talking about other than the solar panels and the agricultural enclosures? For example, let's just take our apartment buildings, which we have so many 6-story apartment buildings. What else could we expect to see on those roofs as a result of the zoning change?
I'm honestly, I think you might have covered it unless I'm missing something from the 17 proposals there that Lucia that you had. I think those are really the primary ones that we plan to see that would have like significant physical, changes that you might see around your neighborhood. But then again, there are kind of exist, and we recognize that there are, kind of design considerations there, and they're not the prettiest things to look at. We're not going to pretend that's the case. Nonetheless, we still think that this is something that, could serve greater goals. And at the same time, we recognize that there are currently permitted obstructions that are permitted on roofs, right? When it comes to dormer rules and things like that. And so, this kind of would be somewhat similar in that category.
I don't think, and speaking for myself and taking the liberty of speaking for others here, I don't think we disagree with your goals by any means. Just trying to get a visualization of the impact.
Certainly.
And to try to have some balance
Of course.
between the lofty goals and the streetscape that we currently have.
Understood. Absolutely. We'll get
Thank
more detail on that.
Great.
Also on rooftops, would heat pumps and battery storage be allowed on rooftops?
I believe mechanicals maybe a lot of rooftops. I'm not sure about the battery storage, so we will get back to you on that.
Electrical code does not allow, I think, to my understanding, New York City electrical code does not allow like large electrical storage to be placed on roofs. Because in the case of a fire, like fire trucks, firefighting needs to kind of get to that, Doris. So
Okay,
most
but
likely
I would like clarification from DCP. Because if apartment houses are going to have to convert to full electric, and they can't put their equipment in the basement, where are they going to put it?
Yep, it could be on the side of a building but I will certainly, we can follow up with that. We'll bring it back to our zoning team and get you clarification.
Yeah. And again, there are some mechanical items that are already permitted on rooftops, right? Kind of as I talked about previously. So battery storage, will check on that. This is getting in the weeds and past my pay grade, but we can get more confirmation on exactly kind of the specifics on that.
Yeah, and it is also important to note that FDNY can reject anything they deem unsafe. So at the end of the day, that's their final, their final call as to what's appropriate.
And I have concerns about the electrical grid in our community. We have sections of our community that regularly have blackouts when there are no major electrical problems. It's not a major heat wave. It's just Diker Heights doesn't have power today. How are we going to deal with a grid system that does not effectively serve our community now and making everything more electrified? What plans do you have for that and to keep our community safe?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. We're heard and we're sympathetic to, and obviously where Con Ed is aware of, it certainly falls under Con Ed's purview. But they're committed to having an electrical grid by, I believe, 2050. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So they're working towards that goal now. And over the long term, having that electrical grid will it will be more resilient than the grid that we have right now. There obviously is a long-term vision, and it's something that, coming up on the summer, we're obviously very sympathetic, to the problems that we have with the grid currently in the city. And I think that's something that, we certainly will bring those. Our department's been working with Con Ed on these proposals that we'll certainly bring back the concerns that we hear from the community during this process, to reiterate the need and the concerns that people have about moving forward and making sure that we have that resilient grid. Feel free to add more, my colleagues.
Yeah, I just want to say that's a good example of how a lot of these are so interconnected, right? I think when it comes to reinforcing buildings and allowing some of that, we're allowing, a little bit more solar energy on some buildings, or allowing, electrification within one's home if they want to. Again, none of these are required. That really carries across to sometimes less energy use on the grid as a whole, right? And makes things more resilient and could reduce those blackouts that, you suffer from in Diker Heights or in Bay Ridge, right? And so that's not to say that we don't need to work with Con Ed to make sure that the grid is clean and that it's working effectively. But that's to say that, this isn't an added stressor, or it's not intended to be an added stressor on the electrical grid. If anything, we think that it's going to reduce demand on the grid and reduce those situations. Amber, feel free to add.
Sure, yes. I think in addition, this is where those energy storage systems really come into play as an opportunity to store, energy for future use when it's really needed most. And that's one of the, ways in which we would look to mitigate some of these, blackouts and such that we've experienced in the past. It's a solution forward for that.
I would say we need more information on these proposed energy storage facilities, how they would apply in residential communities. Because we are a residential community with commercial overlay, and we need to know how that would work. So I think we need a lot more detail on that. Thank you. Stephanie.
Yes, thank you. You spoke about wind being one of the elements that would help with decarbonizing the energy grid. What does that look like, especially, let's say, in South Brooklyn? Are we talking about windmills? What regulation goes with that, please?
Sure. So I think when we talk about wind, I think it's like an overarching, like state goal. I don't know if that proposal per se is like going to be as relevant in all of our neighborhoods. I would definitely like to follow up with our zoning team on that, so to make sure that, I can get you the right information. But But I do hear your concerns about, what would that would look like in Southern Brooklyn. And the specific proposal I talked about before, it wouldn't be changing anything. It would be if folks want to have, wind powered systems, that they could go before the City Planning Commission for those applications. So they would still need to go through a formal process. They would still need to bring that to DCP and get CPC approval. So it wouldn't be something that people could do as of right. But I'd be happy to get you more information when we follow up just on, what that would look like, for
Okay,
CB10.
because I do understand that it was about the zoning and allowing people to go before the commission, I believe you said, but are there any parameters or guidelines or requirements in place now for people who would want to harness wind power?
It's a good question. I believe there is a current CPC certification, but I'd like to follow up on that.
Okay, thank you.
Josephine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Doris, my question was yours about, really paying attention to the battery storage, the, impacts to that, really understanding and diving into the impact specifically to our district. I think will be important because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions around that. And I think just as a the Zoning and Land Use Committee, I just want to share with the members here, and I know there are some members from the Environmental Committee, is that the district office is beginning to get a lot of calls and concerns expressed about Local Law 97. That deadline is swiftly approaching, and there are many larger cooperative buildings, and we're starting to hear from some apartment owners about concerns about the cost impacts in the community. And I think it's something that, perhaps not in this forum as we're reviewing this law, but maybe something down the road, we could, speak to as a board, because as we see new developments move in, we're going to have full electrification, and we do have issues with our grid now. I've been to meetings with Con Edison, who's before, a few years ago, and saying we don't have enough in the grid to support the electricity that we need. So I'm sure there are plans ahead to build and create more capacity. And I think this battery storage is going to be a big part of that, and understanding how that impacts our board, I think is important. But also hearing from, perhaps we could do this in the fall, the impacts to Local Law 97 as they're impacting our community might be something we should take up. And the last thing I'll say is that I am a little concerned about the public hearing process to this text amendment. I'm actually disappointed. Early on when we met with DCP, we stressed the importance of being able to hear and have public hearings, when people are around, and the summertime is probably the most inconvenient time for public, review. Our review ends in June, so we'll be timely and have that. And I know that will continue, just making sure that we advertise as much as we can the DCP public hearing in July, which is typically not as well attended, unfortunately, but I think we can, work toward doing our best to publicizing those events and knowing about them so we could share them with our e-distribution. We have a great newsletter, and, keeping in touch with those dates, I think, is important. That's all, Doris. That's all I have.
I've one more point. You've given us a presentation, which is your interpretation of the zoning text amendment. Could you please send us the zoning text amendment? Don't ask me to look it up on your website. Send it to me. Send it to the board.
Can certainly do that. And also, I'll just say, we certainly, I'll bring that feedback to our community engagement team as well. We do understand this summer it can be a tough time for boards, so we appreciate your work in publicizing it and getting folks to weigh in on it. And David, go ahead.
I'd like to add to that as well. As noted, by Josephine at the very beginning, it's not a typical ULURP process, but I think that also gives us a little bit more freedom, right? So technically, if we're going technically, right, the review for community boards ends in June, and technically the public hearing is in July. Yeah, that's all true. But the vote is not actually happening until September. And the reason for that is that, we're very, very happy. And in fact, part of the reason for scheduling like this is because we have intention to review things, even if they come after a deadline, right? The deadlines are a little bit, they're not arbitrary. I don't want to say that necessarily, but if you've got something to stay in July and August, please, please, please send it. And I think we're moving past kind of the phase of planning that may have been popular in decades past, where we'd have one public hearing and that would be it, right? We recognize folks can't go to public hearings. Sometimes it's a while to travel, it requires getting a babysitter, whatever it may be. And so we're reviewing basically everything. And that comes from these forums here. I've been taking notes to bring back to the team to make sure they're well, understand kind of the concerns of how it would affect CV10. If you want to email me or Lucia or any of us directly, you're more than welcome to do so. We encourage it. And if you'd like to continue to participate, even if it doesn't necessarily meet the public hearing, timing exactly, or if it doesn't meet these deadlines, the vote is not till September, and we did that for a reason, right? And so we are sympathetic. We understand that summertime can be difficult, but our intention with this is to make sure that we're not being so rigid with a lot of this stuff, and we want to make sure we get as much input as we can.
Okay, great. So the committee's going to have homework. The committee will reconvene. Doris has
Yes.
already penciled in a meeting for June 7th, where the committee will formulate a motion and recommendations and comments to the Department of City Planning. I think in order to do that, we'll send out the full text and lots of good links to some really great scholarly articles on some of the questions that were raised today. And I'm sure we'll get some of the answers to the questions that were raised before the 7th. So board members, look for an email from me, hopefully within the next day or two.
Our understanding is that June 7th meeting is internal. If you'd like one of us to be present, we're happy to do so. But if you'd like us to get the heck away and just talk amongst yourself,
Oh, no,
that's
you're
also fine.
Okay, all good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So,
Yeah, and I'll post my email in the chat, and I will certainly first thing tomorrow I'll be sending out these questions to our team, and I'll try to get those back to you as soon as possible. As you know, it's a holiday weekend, so I'm not going to put promises on time, but we
so
certainly
I-
understand that
yeah.
you'll be
No
meeting
worries.
again on June 7th. So we'll try to get them as quickly as we can. And again, I just want to really thank you for your thoughtful questions and for allowing us, to share the text amendment. And yeah, if you don't have my email, I'm going to put it in, but you can always feel free to reach out to me, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can.
Great. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
It was nice meeting you and
Yeah.
seeing you, David.
I look forward to working with all of you very much.
Yes, and Amber, thank you so much. Doris, I think that's all we have on our agenda.
Okay, I think so. So yes, committee members, we will have homework. We will go through tonight's presentation. We will get the full text amendment, and we have a little work to do before our June meeting.
Great. And Lucia already sent me the PowerPoint, so that'll be, we'll
That's
add that
great,
too.
thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Have a great